Rule 3, create excludable benefits from participation. What are excludable benefits from participation? Okay, these are defined as a valued private good that can be acquired only by contributing to the public good. The idea of a private good tied to participation in producing a public good seems almost contradictory, but it's very sensible. Two of Alinsky's rules address it directly. His rule 6 was, a good tactic is one your people enjoy. His rule 7 was, a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. In other words, if you can make the act of participating fun, entertaining, enjoyable, or even profitable, people will do it more. Here's a simple example. A major activity of the famous group Amnesty International is writing letters to dictators and authoritarian governments, asking them for the release of specific prisoners of conscience. The spotlight from receiving thousands of letters about a specific individual seems to make a difference. However, traditionally, Amnesty did not ask its members to sit at home and write letters in isolation from one another, a tedious prospect at best. Instead, members got together in monthly groups and wrote letters together. This maneuver turned letter writing from a tedious drag into a fun social activity where friendships were formed and people socialized together. This technique is less attractive to young people today, and Amnesty is experimenting with social media as an alternative. Another example of excludable benefits is the merchandise given with membership or sold to members in the public. The merchandise can be attractive and useful, but more than that, it affords people an opportunity to affirm their identity to themselves and in public. The World Wildlife Federation, the WWF, for instance, has been ingenious at devising attractive merchandise, often designed pro bono by talented artists. Hats, t-shirts, tote bags, umbrellas are just the tip of an iceberg. That includes jewelry, games, Christmas tree decorations, and my favorite, paste-on art for fingernails. As I understand it, prime buyers of NGO merchandise are women in their 40s and 50s. Bear this in mind for appropriate gift giving. Examples of excludable benefits from group membership abound. A famous example is the magazine subscriptions that typically come with membership in professional organizations. For instance, physicians who join the American Medical Association, the AMA, receive JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. This is useful to doctors because they learn about new drugs from the magazine's abundant advertisements. AMA members like the magazine, a private good, but their dues support AMA lobbyists in Washington, a public good. As a member of the American Political Science Association, I receive edge-of-the-seat reading like the American Political Science Review. Also, I get cheaper car rentals. I'm not so sure my dues can be much more value. Do members really join groups to receive tote bags and magazines and make new friends? Not necessarily, but excludable benefits surely boost membership and contributions. Here's a final example due to Princeton sociologist Paul Starr and found in his outstanding book, The Social Transformation of American Medicine. In the U.S., local medical societies traditionally had great difficulty getting doctors to join. As a result, many local medical societies collapsed. But the situation turned around when local medical societies found a really nifty excludable benefit. Medical malpractice in the U.S. is based on local standards of practice, not universal standards of best practice. So, litigation often requires a local doctor to testify that another local doctor performed badly. Local medical societies developed the norm that members of the society would not testify against each other. Oh, what a great benefit. Join the local medical society and receive immunity from medical malpractice suits. The flip side of excludable benefits from participation is targeted sanctions for non-participations. That's our Rule 4, create sanctions for non-participation. Here's a simple example. In Australia, failure to vote brings a penalty, sort of like a speeding ticket. You will be hardly surprised to discover that voting participation in Australia is far, far higher than in the US or even comparable OECD countries. And the best study on the subject finds real policy consequences from near universal voting. Of course, few groups have access to the power of the state to sanction non-participators. Nonetheless, the same principle applies, but implemented through local social networks rather than state enforcement. A famous field experiment in Michigan conducted by Yale researchers illustrates the basic idea. The study examined voting turnout. Randomly chosen residents were told by the researchers that the researchers would inform their neighbors whether they turned out to vote in the upcoming election. The prospect of public shaming boosted voting participation. Creating sanctions for non-participation, well, it may not be easy. Creating and maintaining sanctions, after all, is a public good. Now, it involves two components. First, the extent of non-participation of every member must be monitored. Second, someone must enforce the sanction, like shaming, and this could well be costly for the enforcer. In practice, monitoring takes place within social networks so that the actions for each individual are highly visible to at least several other members. For example, in our East LA example, if Lucy does not show up at protests, Maria is likely to notice. Within these social networks, sanctions typically consist of ostracism, gossip, snubbing, ridicule, verbal assaults, and other forms of shaming. Because potential participants may be locked into long-term relationships with each other, these punishments, while seemingly somewhat minor, can be quite stinging, hard to avoid, and actually rather effective. Why do the punishers actually engage in punishment, another public good? In order to account for the administration of punishments, we need to step outside our bare bones model. Probably the best explanation involves what's sometimes called altruistic punishment. Altruistic punishment is the desire felt by many people to punish non-participators in collective action, even though the punishment does not directly benefit the punisher and in fact may be costly for them to administer. Its experiments and extensive field data show that many, perhaps most people, take pleasure from punishing people who are seen as deserving punishment. A moment of self-reflection may confirm the existence of this impulse in yourself. This figure looks at the effect from incorporating selective punishment into our simple model of asteroid defense. Not surprisingly, sanctions for non-participation really increase individual contributions. Small punishments increase individual contributions only modestly, but multiplied across many potential participants, the effect on total contributions can be substantial. Now, leaders have two choices to find the social networks necessary for selective actions to work. The first is by far the easiest: piggyback on existing networks. For example, use church congregations, clubs, workplaces, professional associations, and the like. The second option is a bit harder: create the social network anew. For example, consider again the letter writing groups traditionally used by Amnesty International. The groups make letter writing fun, but at least potentially, they also create a social network in which sanctions could be applied. As another example, revolutionaries frequently organize themselves into small cells. Now, this structure insulates the larger group from the capture and interrogation of a few of its members, but it also creates a social network in which cell members monitor each other's behavior and can apply sanctions to shirkers. Alinsky's rules don't address selective sanctions for non-participation. A curious omission. But it's hard to believe his community organizations didn't actually use such sanctions. Rule 5. Now, in our discussion of how the mighty are exploited by the meek, we've already covered this ground. High demanders, participants with abundant resources, and efficient producers are big contributors. Others will free ride or easy ride on their efforts, but if the public good is a normal good, the overall effect will be positive. Therefore, groups should recruit and cultivate these mega contributors. In Rule 4, I discussed the use of altruistic punishers, but there's another type of altruist who's also extremely valuable for collective action: altruistic contributors. In the Maria-Lucy dialogue, the last argument that Maria makes is, it's the right thing to do. Laboratory experiments and common observation document the existence of people who sincerely believe such arguments and find them compelling. They take pride in contributing. They experience a warm glow from doing so. They feel a personal obligation to contribute. They're also moved by moral exhortation, and the combination of moral suasion and altruistic punishment seems to be particularly effective. It's important to understand that even altruistic contributors are not infinitely willing to contribute. Instead, you might see them as people who view their contribution as particularly important, something like the sole purchaser of a public good we saw earlier. Such a purchaser is certainly sensitive to costs, but she doesn't treat the contributions of others as an opportunity to free ride. In some sense, her best response function is not downward sloping, or at least not as much as the ordinary person's. Because of this reluctance to free ride or easy ride, altruistic contributors are a terrific resource for collective action. But altruistic contributors should be used economically. In particular, groups may want to hoard their altruistic contributors and spend them in the toughest places. That is, places where participation costs can't be subsidized, where selective benefits are scarce, where selective punishment is ineffective. And perhaps the most important place meeting this description is leadership roles themselves. The sad truth is, leadership in organizations is far from glamorous. It's hard work, often poorly remunerated, frequently frustrating, often discouraging, and sometimes even punishing. But unless someone takes on the responsibility of leadership, collective action will fail. It makes great sense to slot altruistic contributors into leadership roles because they'll work hard and keep on going when others would quit or shirk. They take a licking and keep on ticking. In this sense, collective action organizations need to cherish their altruistic contributors. And one might say, exploit them thoughtfully. If collective action organizations like MILA, the Mothers of East Los Angeles, follow Rule 6, one would expect the top leadership to be disproportionately filled by altruists. So, this ends our discussion for today of rules for reformers. In later lectures, we'll address group strategy. What's the best message to send through collective action? And who should we target? These are vital matters, but the foundation is clear thinking about the free riding problem and how to deal with it. I hope you now grasp the basics of collective action.